You're listening to Protecting What Matters by the Ohio Department of Commerce. Commerce is Ohio's chief regulator, and we play a vital role in keeping you safe by protecting your property, your money, and some of the products you use every day. This is designed to bring awareness to important issues and help educate consumers and businesses. Join us as we chat with trusted industry experts focused on providing you with the tools you need to help you protect what matters most in your life.
A volunteer department makes the most sense, but what we've seen over time is the spirit of volunteerism has decreased, and we simply don't have enough people coming into the volunteer fire service that we need.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Protecting What Matters. I'm your host, Andy Ellinger, and today we're going to discuss the Task Force on Volunteer Fire Service report recommendations, how it impacts your community, and what's next for the task force. Joining me today is State Fire Marshal Kevin Reardon and Ohio Fire Academy Bureau Chief Jack Smith. How are you guys today?
Very good, Andy. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Great to have you. The volunteer fire service is essential for protecting Ohio's smaller communities, receiving nearly 1.4 million calls each year. In April of 22, a task force on volunteer fire service was formed with 25 members representing local fire departments, municipalities, and state agencies. Today, we're diving into the task force report on volunteer fire service to learn about the recommendations and initiatives to improve the critical service provided by first responders. So how do we get here? The task force delivered 31 pages of a report containing recommendations to improve volunteer services, but it didn't happen overnight. Guys, tell us about the process.
The process itself was very interesting. We've never done anything like this before at the Fire Marshal's office, specifically looking at the volunteer fire service. So that was unique in and of itself, but we also had to have a process that included a lot of people. I don't profess to be an expert on everything fire service related, but we also needed to bring in people from other areas. We obviously included people that are involved in the volunteer fire service because that's our primary customer in this group, but we also needed to bring in people from other disciplines. The County Commissioners Association, for example, township trustees, city managers, workers' compensation, the insurance industry, the business community. A lot of these other areas are affected by the service they receive from their volunteer fire departments. So they bring a different and unique perspective about how that service fits into each community. So they were a valuable partner in this, and they brought a lot to the table when we started to meet as a task force.
Jack, one of our partners that we discovered during this phase of the task force meeting throughout the state was the National Volunteer Fire Council. Tell us what they brought to the table and how key they were in our work.
Well, the National Volunteer Fire Council has been around for a number of years, and they're a huge resource and advocacy group for the volunteer fire service. And they really are a pipeline and a resource of information for the volunteer fire service, ranging from recruitment and retention strategies, health and wellness resources and strategies, training opportunities. It really runs the full gamut, and they have been just a wonderful resource for us as well.
Yeah, they run the full gamut, and this report and its recommendations also do. It includes it focuses on volunteer recruitment and retention, training enhancements, financial stability. Why are these areas identified as crucial for the success of Ohio's volunteer fire departments? I'll open up to either one of you on that.
Wow. Each one is critical. I'll start with financial. Historically, fire departments at the local level, whether they're in a city, a village, or a township, they are dependent upon the funding that they receive from their communities. Whether by taxes or bond packages or special levies, whatever it may be, those fire departments survive on what the community gives them for support. Over time, that has shrunken. The value of some of the millage on some of the levies that are out there has decreased. It's not been replaced. At the same time, the cost of fire equipment goes up, price of diesel fuel goes up, everything is going up, but a lot of the income that fire departments receive is the same or getting stagnant. So fire departments are a high dollar item. You're talking about a pumper truck that might cost $750,000, a ladder truck $1 million or more, and that's just to mention a few things. The cost of diesel fuel, self-contained breathing apparatus, protective gear. One complete protective gear package for a volunteer firefighter or full-time firefighter can cost as much as $3,000 to $4,000. So you can pretty quickly see how that adds up, and that's an issue. We have some volunteer fire departments in Ohio that are doing very well, but we have others that are not doing very well, and that's our focus. We want to try to find things to keep them operational well into the future. But we know, for one thing, if we don't do anything at all, some of these departments will start to fade away in the next few years. And that makes it worse for all the other volunteer departments around the area.
I would also add that just as some of the societal changes that we've seen across the state, whether it's a community that lost their primary employer, and so now most of the workforce is commuting an hour or two outside of town to find a job, or in the agricultural areas where we see a lot of folks of that working age that are leaving agriculture, and so those communities are aging overall. And so during the day, but even in the evenings, trying to get folks that are available to respond to a call is becoming much more of a challenge. Like the marshals said before, we make it pretty hard to be a volunteer firefighter, not just in Ohio, but in the nation. And I think a lot of times the community doesn't understand what they're truly asking of a volunteer. If they have to buy their own personal protective equipment, that ensemble from helmet to boots and everything in between can be $3,000 to $4,000. Then lights and siren for your vehicle on top of that. We see if somebody made a run in the early morning hours and are late to their full-time job, they can jeopardize their full-time job, for being late repeatedly. So over and over, there's these challenges, and then adding the training requirements. This is a job that if you're not careful, you can get hurt or even killed in. And so the training component becomes so necessary for safety and health and wellness and survivability in this job. And those training requirements become a much more burdensome initiative for people who are already working full-time jobs, have families, etc.
Most of our listeners, they understand how important volunteer firefighters are, but let's just to hammer that point home, 1.4 million calls each year are received by our fire service in Ohio. Around 70% of those are volunteers that respond.
We believe that around 70% of the 1,180 fire departments that we have in Ohio are volunteer, which aligns basically along the same statistic that we see nationwide. 65 to 70% nationwide are volunteer departments. It's hard to drive more than 5 minutes away from Columbus, Cleveland, Akron, anywhere, without being served by a volunteer fire department in Ohio. So when you look at 1.4 million incident reports that we receive, and realize that 70% of those could be from volunteer fire departments, that's a very heavy load, a very, very heavy load. And once you take out the large cities, what's left is all of the volunteer runs. So it's very significant. They do an outstanding job in Ohio, and they do it with a lot of challenges and a lot of obstacles. Like Chief Smith said, you can't do this job without training. That training has a cost. You can't do this job without the proper protective gear. That has a cost. You're going to leave your family for holidays, different parties and things at a moment's notice to go help one of your citizens in your community. Not a lot of people are designed to do that. That's not in their makeup. But a lot of people do want to get out and do that. And those people add so much value to their community. These are also in communities that don't have the run volume to support a full-time fire department. So a volunteer department makes the most sense. But what we've seen over time is the spirit of volunteerism has decreased. and we simply don't have enough people coming into the volunteer fire service that we need. Farmers used to be the largest source of volunteer firefighters in Ohio, and over time they've retired, gotten out of the business. Whoever comes behind them isn't interested in becoming a volunteer, and that just has multiplied itself over the years to get us to the point we are now of not having enough volunteers to serve communities.
Well, and kind of to highlight that, the Department of Public Safety, their data shows that the average age of a volunteer firefighter in Ohio is 54 years old. So that means that half of them are in their late 50s, 60s, and in early 70s. And, that's a strain on those folks and those communities.
And we have some volunteer departments in Ohio that, have been around for decades and decades and decades, and several of them are over 100 years. A year ago, I was in Pomeroy, Ohio, to help them celebrate their 175th anniversary
Wow.
as a volunteer fire department. And that's not unique. Those departments that are all over Ohio that have that 150-year history, 175-year history. The Columbus Fire Department, my alma mater, just celebrated its 200th anniversary this past April. So fire departments have been around a long time. People don't think about them too often until they need them.
So it's pretty evident why the volunteer fire service is so important, and why this work of this task force and recommendations were so important. Let's go over some of those recommendations. And first off, we're waiving the state fire marshal, Ohio Fire Academy fees for volunteer firefighters. How important is that? How critical is that?
Well, it's very critical because, like the marshal said, the budgets of the fire departments, they're having fish fries and spaghetti dinners just to have enough money for gas or for diesel fuel. So to pay to send their staff here to the academy or even to participate in an online class is just something that usually those costs then fall to the individual. So to be able to eliminate those fees for volunteers is a significant benefit for those folks, because honestly, then it's not money that's coming out of their actual personal income.
And when we say waiving fees, are there going to be hidden fees for these volunteers, or are we really talking about free?
Free, free, free.
Yeah, so if they're coming here, no dorm fees, no SCBA rental fees, no tuition fees, no book fees. Lunch is included in all of those classes that are less than a week long.
So for those 70% of volunteers in the state, so that's a huge amount of firefighters out there. Mm-hmm. They can all take advantage of everything, the hundreds of classes and courses that the Ohio Fire Academy has.
That's online classes, our campuses, our on-campus classes, any of our remote learning classes, anything and everything that the Ohio Fire Academy offers will be free to volunteers.
It's your money. Come and claim it.
No
The Ohio Department of Commerce Division of Unclaimed Funds is currently safeguarding more than
Less
$3
than a
billion
week
in unclaimed funds. So there's a good chance you or someone you know has money waiting to be claimed.
That's a huge amount.
Just head over to our
firefighters
website,
on hold.
unclaimedfunds.ohio.gov, to search your name,
Take
the
advantage
name of a
of
family member
everything,
or a
the
loved one, to
hundreds of
see if you have an unclaimed fund.
We're back with Protecting What Matters. I'm your host, Andy Ellinger, and we're discussing the Task Force on Volunteer Fire Service Report recommendations with State Fire Marshal Kevin Reardon and Ohio Fire Academy Bureau Chief Jack Smith. We were talking about the Academy fees being waived, and going hand in hand with that is an increase to firefighter 1 and 2 grants and equipment grants. What kind of stuff does that get a volunteer fire department? How important is that for them?
So the Fire Academy, obviously, we're here, our campus is here just east of Columbus, but there are 62 other programs chartered under the Department of Public Safety that provide some of those entry-level training classes for firefighters, and those are evenly distributed amongst fire departments, community colleges, and career tech centers all across the state. So those training programs that are out there that offer firefighter 1 level training and firefighter 2 level training, this grant will cover those programs even delivered at those community colleges or career tech centers in that county.
And then the equipment go hand in hand with these.
The equipment runs the gamut from simple things like gloves to extrication tools to just about everything in between. It's pretty broad.
Yeah. Another item that we're excited about is recruitment PSAs for volunteer firefighters. A lot of volunteer fire departments aren't able to do that sort of recruitment outside of maybe word of mouth. So what we're going to do is with that partnership that Jack mentioned earlier with the National Volunteer Fire Council, and we're partnering with their makemeafirefighter.org website to increase the opportunities throughout Ohio, tying into all local fire departments that can use this site to recruit firefighters, volunteer firefighter opportunities at their departments. And to support that effort, we're developing video advertisements, PSAs, to drive folks to that. We're excited about this, right, Marshall?
We are, because the volunteer community is busy just serving the needs of their community. A lot of the departments don't have the resources to do PSAs or take out ads in the local paper or do any kind of recruitment effort at all. So partnering with the National Volunteer Fire Council, who's done an outstanding job of putting together some very generic public service announcements about becoming a volunteer, we'll put an Ohio spin on those announcements to make it a little bit more local and a little bit more homey type of feel. But that's going to be critical in letting people know that volunteering is a good opportunity to serve your community. There's lots of ways you could serve your community in a volunteer fire department other than being a volunteer firefighter. Volunteer departments need people to take and help do set up for local events, help support their people when they're at fires. There's a lot of ways, but we still need people that are willing to take and put on the gear, take the training, and be willing to become a volunteer firefighter. So it's a challenge. People aren't volunteering in the large numbers that they used to decades ago. And even 5 years ago, the spirit of volunteerism has gone down significantly. So letting people know about the opportunity is critical, and helping the volunteer fire departments throughout the state get that word out is going to be critical to helping them get an influx of new people, which is desperately needed.
Another key recommendation was designating a full-time volunteer coordinator out of the state fire marshal's office. How is that position going to help the local fire departments?
This is a new position for us at the fire marshal's office, and we're actually going to model this position out of a similar position that's in the Department of Public Safety for a law enforcement recruiter. This is a person that will be able to go out and work with volunteer fire departments on recruitment efforts, help them connect us with training and other services maybe that we provide, but they're going to be the volunteer fire services go-to person at the state fire marshal's office. So we're very much looking forward to that. That person will be embedded within the Ohio Fire Academy under Chief Smith, because we expect them to have a little bit of a training role in promoting the training, making sure that it's available and people know about it. Volunteers don't have time to get on the internet and just peruse to see what opportunities are out there. They're busy working their jobs to keep their families safe and secure. They're supporting their local fire department however they can. They don't have a lot of extra time to go out and do some of the things that we envision our volunteer recruiter being able to do. So we're looking forward to that in a big way.
Jack, another one of our recommendations, probably something folks wouldn't be able to see from the outside, but it's updating and expanding our training IT system. How does that benefit our local fire departments?
Well, the primary way that it'll benefit is that, like we've been talking about, time is a huge challenge. Availability is a huge challenge for volunteers. They're already working a full-time job. Most of them have families. And so if we can continue to reduce barriers to training and improve access to training by having them having access to that at their own homes or at the firehouse. So kind of working in conjunction with the governor's Innovate Ohio initiative, we want to be able to provide as much of this online access as possible. One of the things that we learned coming out of the pandemic is that we can, in fact, provide high quality, engaging training. Now that doesn't replace the hands-on component of that, right? Whether you're deploying a fire hose or setting a ladder or using the jaws of life. But there's a lot of the didactic or lecture portions of that can be covered online in an engaging way to where the retention of that information is adequate, and we can provide that training in such a way that is easier access for the volunteers.
So these are all recommendations to recommend, get through the legislative budget process and get signed by the governor. So that's all going to happen this year. There are some other recommendations that we're going to be take a little longer to implement. We were talking about length of service, awards programs, free tuition, vouchers, volunteer cadet programs. There are a litany of things. Are there any of those we want to expand on that will be our next phase of recommendations that are critical?
I think any and all of those are good places to start. We have seen that departments that are doing well, volunteer departments that are doing well, have some form of cadet program or an explorer program or something involving youth in their community. So an expansion of those seems to be critical in helping get younger people interested in the fire and EMS services. One of the other things that is in the report, and there's so many recommendations in the report, none of them are going to cause any harm. That's the good news. But one of them in particular hasn't gotten much attention. I hope it gets a little bit more attention, is an infrastructure grant program for the volunteer fire service. I have been in fire stations, that the newest building was built in 1952. Their oldest building was built in 1868. And that story can be repeated all throughout the state of Ohio. Many of these facilities are barely functional for the volunteer fire department, but yet we have no means to take and fund any development or expansion or building of new facilities. So an infrastructure grant program for the volunteer community would go a long way. Communities just simply don't have the funding necessary anymore without increasing taxes or increasing services somewhere else to provide for new structures for fire departments. The length of service award program is interesting because many states do this. They award their volunteers by putting them in a pension system that is supported by the state to help them have some kind of a benefit in their later years in life. That's a great idea. Volunteers receive no benefits in Ohio right now, other than what they may or may not receive from the local community. So anything along those lines are good. Tuition reimbursement has been tossed out for a while now as a means to get people into vocational training to help them change careers if they're stuck in a current career, or even get basic job training in one of the skills that trade skills that are becoming very, very hard to fill. Those that want to pursue a college degree, whether 2-year or 4-year, again, tuition reimbursement is a great option. And I think the way we envision that working is someone would volunteer as a volunteer firefighter in their community for a certain period of time, and in return they would receive tuition reimbursement for that period of time to go to school while at the same time they're supporting their community.
We're back with our final segment of Protecting What Matters. I'm your host, Andy Ellinger, and we're still discussing the recommendations from the Task Force on Volunteer Fire Service. We wanted to continue talking about some of the recommendations that are in the report. Jack, what did you have to say about some future thoughts we have on recommendations?
So as part of this initiative with the task force, we actually did quite a bit of networking and research with our colleagues all across the country. And you see volunteer fire service is very active up and down the East Coast, also all over the country. But we talk about length of service award programs functioning as a pension system. New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia have got some very robust systems that have been in place for a long time and really do provide volunteers a financial incentive And that formula is built on how active they are within, how many runs they're taking, how much training they're completing, that type of thing. And so it reminded me of a Stanford University economics study that came out a few years ago that said that the average family income allotted for inflation is the same as it was in 1964. However, it now takes 2 income earners to get that. And so if you have both mom and dad working, who's watching the kids while somebody needs to take a fire run, right? And so if there are some financial incentives, whether we're talking about a length of service award program, much like the pension for the National Guard, or whether we're talking about tuition reimbursement for the active duty volunteer, or even if that's transferable to their kids, we're building into communities. So it's a financial incentive for the individual family, but this is workforce development and long-term investment in families and in communities together.
Now, this task force is not something that was brought together to do this work and then step away. We're still working on initiatives.
The task force does not have a sunset date, so the task force is still convened. We're available for any tasks that the governor would assign to us. And for right now, we're waiting for these other parts and pieces to come in, and we'll see what's next. I think part of what's next is working with the legislature to see what they're interested in moving forward and how we can help with that. The key is we've got to keep moving forward.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank both of you, State Fire Marshal Kevin Reardon and Ohio Fire Academy Bureau Chief Jack Smith, for joining me today. Thank you very much for your time today on this critically important issue. The task force report highlights the dedication of improving Ohio's volunteer fire service and the vital role they play in protecting communities. These recommendations are critical to impact the future of firefighting in the state. See the full report and more on the Volunteer Fire Service Task Force and all its recommendations. Visit the State Fire Marshal's website at com.ohio.gov/fire.